Inside Floyd Mayweather's massive Las Vegas empire. He owns a real estate empire, a piece of one of the tallest towers in New York City, 62 apartment buildings bought in a single stroke across Harlem and Washington Heights. A man who says he now makes more money in his sleep than he ever made throwing a single punch. You already know the fighter. 50 fights, 50 wins, 0 losses. The pay-per-view king. The one who called himself money long before the rest of the world agreed with him. But almost nobody is telling the part that actually matters. Not the belts, not the fleet of cars, the deeds. So here is the real question. How does a kid from Grand Rapids, a kid who got hit in the face for a living, end up with his name quietly written into the Manhattan skyline? Stay with this, because the answer turns out to be much bigger than boxing. This is a channel that goes deep on the wealth, the power, and the legacy of the Black community around the world. The empires that most media never bothers to explain. And this is not the story you have already heard about Floyd Mayweather. Forget the diamonds and the private jets for a moment. The untold story is how one of the highest-paid athletes in history took a fortune that, by every rule of his sport, should have evaporated and turned it into something that compounds while he does nothing at all. The Grand Rapids Blueprint. He was born on February 24, 1977, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, into a boxing family. His father was a welterweight contender. His uncle was a champion. And by his own account, home was a single one-bedroom apartment shared by as many as 7 people. So boxing was never a hobby. It was the exit. But here is the trap almost every fighter falls into. And it is the quiet engine of this entire story. A fighter only earns while he is fighting. The moment the gloves come off, the money stops, the body breaks down, the big paydays end, and the fortune starts draining away. Mayweather understood that earlier than most. There is a moment he describes over and over, a conversation with the leadership of a New York real estate company, where the whole idea finally clicked into place. In his words, a boxer makes money when he is boxing. But New York real estate, you make money when you sleep. Therefore, the entire plan changed. The goal was no longer the next purse. The goal was to own things that would pay him whether he showed up or not. That is the thesis underneath everything that follows. Fame depreciates. Ownership compounds. If that idea lands on you the way it landed on him, subscribe and turn on notifications now, because everything from this point on is the blueprint for how he actually pulled it off. And it begins with an amount of money most people could never imagine walking away from. The foundation years. Because the raw material was staggering. Across his career, by reasonable estimates, Mayweather earned somewhere north of $1.1 billion. He is the highest-paid boxer who has ever lived, and it is not particularly close. But he did not simply win fights, he owned the promotion. Through his own company, Mayweather Promotions, he cut out the middleman that quietly skims most fighters, and he kept the lion's share of his biggest nights, the record-shattering bouts against Manny Pacquiao and Conor McGregor. So the income was enormous, and just as importantly, it was fully his. And yet income was never the empire, it was only the foundation. $1 billion earned means nothing if it leaves as fast as it arrives, and the history of boxing is a graveyard of men who proved exactly that. The real question was never how much he made, it was what that money would become, because Mayweather had already decided to turn fists into deeds. The pivot to ownership. He tells the origin of it plainly. It started with an investment of $5 million. That single stake was returning around $50,000 every month, year after year, quietly, in the background. And instead of simply enjoying it, he studied the machine and decided to feed it. If 7 figures produced that kind of return, he would push it to 9. The engine underneath all of it is a company called SL Green Realty, the largest office landlord in Manhattan. Back in 2014, at the firm's shareholder conference, Mayweather was announced as a major private investor. Reports place his position with the firm at around $100 million. And his reasoning was simple. In his own words, New York City is the center of the world, And if you buy real estate there and hold on to it over the years, you will always win. So he held. And that one relationship is how a former fighter's name gets attached to some of the most valuable towers in America, including one that dominates the skyline. The headline property, One Vanderbilt. Picture a 93-story tower rising over Midtown Manhattan, standing right beside Grand Central Terminal at the corner of 42nd Street and Vanderbilt Avenue. It is one of the tallest buildings in all of New York City, and it cost roughly $3.3 billion to build. It opened in September of 2020. The details are the entire point. Its facade was deliberately designed to echo the limestone of Grand Central next door, so the century-old terminal and the brand-new tower read as one continuous piece of the city. Inside, there is a direct connection to the rail terminal below, a restaurant, and near the very top sits the Summit Observation Deck, a soaring glass and mirror experience that now pulls tourists in from around the planet. Now here is where honesty makes the story stronger, not weaker. Mayweather likes to say flatly that he owns 9 skyscrapers, with One Vanderbilt among them. The cleaner truth is that he owns pieces of them through his stake in SL Green, the firm that developed and manages the tower. He reportedly placed around $50 million into this one building alone. He does not hold the sole deed, he holds a slice of the machine that does, and a slice of a $3 billion tower is a remarkable thing to own. But a stake in a glass trophy downtown is not the same thing as owning a building outright, and that distinction is exactly where his next move gets interesting. The buildings he owns alone. Because in a single stroke, Mayweather bought 62 apartment buildings in New York City for $402 million. This was not a passive stake in someone else's tower. This was a purchase. He acquired the portfolio, sometimes called the Morningside portfolio, from a firm called Black Spruce Management, and it added up to more than 1,000 apartments concentrated in Harlem, Washington Heights, and Inwood, the historic heart of Black and immigrant Upper Manhattan. His words on it were blunt. "All the buildings belong to me. I have no partners. Even the retail space on the ground floors is his." It was one of the largest apartment deals the entire city saw that year, and it turned a retired fighter into one of the meaningful private landlords of Upper Manhattan overnight. So now, hold both halves in your head at once. A slice of the glass towers downtown, full ownership of the brick uptown, two completely different ways to own the same city. And together they finally explain how a man earns while he sleeps. The two kinds of ownership. This is the real lesson, and it is worth slowing all the way down on. There are two entirely different structures stacked here. Through SL Green, he owns equity in trophy assets he could never buy alone, which lets $100 million behave like a personal piece of the skyline. And with the apartment portfolio, he owns hard income-producing property outright, with no landlord standing above him. He did not stop there either. He is also reported to have joined a roughly $10 billion office venture with a firm called 601W Companies, with holdings stretching from New York to Chicago to Jersey City. Cash flow from the ring gave him options. Equity turned those options into permanence. And that is the entire difference between being rich for a single decade and being wealthy for a lineage. The legacy lever. And look closely at what he actually bought uptown, because this is where the wealth stops being merely personal. Those 1,000+ apartments are largely affordable housing, and a large share of them carry something called Article 11 status, a tax arrangement that can keep those units affordable for as long as 40 years. In neighborhoods like Harlem, where the constant pressure is families getting priced out of the very blocks their grandparents built, ownership by a man with deep pockets and a 40-year affordability lock is a genuinely different kind of power. It is capital flowing back into Black communities as stability rather than displacement. Whatever you make of the man himself, that is wealth architecture, not charity. The money re-enters the community as a place to live, which leaves one last question. If the buildings simply run themselves, what does his life actually look like now? The life now, quieter than you would ever think, and far richer. He is 49 years old. He still steps into the ring every now and then for exhibition nights against names like Logan Paul, cashing enormous checks for what is essentially glorified sparring. But the truth is, he no longer needs a single one of them. Home base is a custom-built mansion in Las Vegas, roughly 22,000 square feet, with a 2-story movie theater, crystal chandeliers, and walls lined in red silk. And he describes the real business with a grin. When it comes to legalized bank robbing, he says, he is the best. He is not talking about the ring anymore. He is talking about the rent, the synthesis. So go all the way back to where we started. A piece of one of the tallest towers in New York City, that is, One Vanderbilt, held through his equity in SL Green. 62 apartment buildings, bought in a single stroke. That is $402 million of Upper Manhattan, owned outright, no partners. A man who makes more money asleep than he ever made throwing a punch. That is the whole point. That is what the fists were always for. He does not just visit New York City. His name is threaded through its skyline and stitched into its neighborhoods. He owns access, he owns capital, he owns the deeds. He took 50 wins inside a roped square and converted them into a permanent seat inside the machine of Manhattan itself. Fame handed him the check. Ownership handed him the city. Because the belts gather dust, the buildings collect rent. So now, I want to hear from you. Which move was the smartest one? The stake in the skyscrapers, the 62 buildings owned outright, cutting out the middleman with his own promotion company, or locking that uptown housing as affordable for 40 years? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week, we open the books on another icon who quietly became an owner and the untold story of the empire they built while everyone was watching the wrong thing. And if you want to see how another legend turned fame into ownership, that video is on your screen right now. See you on the next video.